The evening shift at Chi Blanc had begun like any other, with soft classical music drifting through the dining room and candlelight flickering against cream-colored walls adorned with gold accents. Maya Thompson moved between tables with the practiced grace of someone who had spent 18 years perfecting every step, every gesture, every word. She balanced a tray of crystal champagne flutes as she approached table 12, where a group of well-dressed businesspeople sat, discussing their latest acquisition. But tonight would shatter the illusion of normalcy in a way no one could have anticipated. As Maya carefully placed each glass before the guests with a warm smile, Richard Beaumont's voice cut through the refined atmosphere like shattered glass. He strode across the dining room, his face flushed with anger, and stopped directly beside her. Before she could even straighten from her service, he spoke loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Maya, I need to speak with you now. This is completely unacceptable. You've embarrassed this establishment for the last time." The room fell silent as 40 pairs of eyes turned toward them. Maya met his gaze with steady composure, her hand still holding the empty tray, her expression revealing nothing of the storm she knew was coming. "Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel." Maya Thompson was 42 years old, and every line on her face told a story of quiet perseverance, an unshakable dignity. Her dark skin seemed to glow in the restaurant's warm lighting, and despite the standard black server's uniform that hung simply from her slender frame, there was something about her bearing that suggested depths no one had bothered to discover. For 18 years, she had walked these floors, memorizing the preferences of regular guests, anticipating needs before they were spoken, and moving through her duties with an efficiency that bordered on artistry. The other servers often marveled at how she could manage 6 tables simultaneously during the dinner rush without ever appearing hurried or flustered. She knew the wine list better than anyone except the sommelier, could recite every ingredient in every dish, and had trained more new hires than she could count. Regular customers requested her section specifically, charmed by her warm smile and genuine attention to their dining experience. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, dietary restrictions, and the small personal details that transformed a meal into a cherished memory. Yet despite this mastery of her craft, management treated her as invisible, a fixture as unremarkable as the tables she served. She had been passed over for promotion to floor manager 3 times in favor of younger servers with far less experience, but the right complexion and connections. Her suggestions for menu improvements or service innovations were politely dismissed during staff meetings, only to be implemented months later as someone else's idea. What no one knew, what she had carefully guarded for 2 years, was that she carried a secret that would transform everything they thought they understood about power and position in this gleaming temple of culinary excellence. Richard Beaumont stood at the center of the dining room, his tall frame draped in an expensive charcoal suit that whispered of old money and inherited privilege. At 50 years old, his silver hair was perfectly styled, his pale skin spoke of country club leisure, and his blue eyes held the cold confidence of someone who had never been told no. He wore a gold signet ring on his right hand, a family heirloom that he twisted absently when issuing orders, and his Italian leather shoes clicked sharply against the polished floor as he moved through the restaurant like a lord surveying his domain. He had arrived at Chi Blanc 2 years ago, shortly after his uncle Pierre Beaumont's death, announcing himself as the rightful heir to the restaurant empire. Within months, he had transformed the atmosphere from one of warm excellence to calculated exclusivity tinged with cruelty. Staff members who had worked under Pierre for decades found themselves suddenly dismissed for minor infractions, replaced with younger workers who would accept lower wages and longer hours. Richard restructured supplier contracts, always choosing the option that maximized his profit margin regardless of quality impact. The carefully curated wine cellar that Pierre had built over 30 years was gradually sold off and replaced with cheaper alternatives in expensive bottles. He walked through the kitchen and dining room like a general inspecting troops, finding fault, issuing orders, and making it clear that his word was absolute law. His treatment of Maya and other black staff members was particularly cruel, though always couched in language that gave him plausible deniability if anyone dared to complain. He assigned them the worst shifts, the most difficult customers, and held them to standards of perfection he never applied to white employees. The memory came to Maya unbidden as she stood in Richard's glare, a memory from 6 years ago when Pierre Beaumont had called her into his private office for what she thought would be a routine discussion about the upcoming holiday menu. Instead, the elderly Frenchman, his face lined with age but his eyes still sharp with intelligence, had closed the door and gestured for her to sit in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. The office smelled of old books and the faint trace of his pipe tobacco, a scent that always reminded Maya of safety and respect. "Maya," he had said in his accented English, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something that no one else knows. I am dying. The doctors give me perhaps 2 years, maybe less." The shock had stolen her breath, tears instantly springing to her eyes, but Pierre had raised his hand gently. He continued, speaking of how he had watched her for over a decade, had seen not just a talented server but a brilliant business mind being wasted because of prejudice and circumstance. He spoke of his own journey from poverty in rural France to culinary success in America, and how he recognized in her the same hunger for excellence, the same attention to detail, the same deep understanding that hospitality was about human dignity. He began that night to teach her everything, staying late after closing to go over financial statements, supplier negotiations, marketing strategies, and the intricate web of relationships that sustained a fine dining empire. 3 nights a week they would sit in his office, Maya taking notes as Pierre explained profit margins, labor costs, customer psychology, and the art of building a brand that meant something beyond mere luxury. He told her about his nephew Richard, a man he had tried to mentor, but who displayed only greed and contempt for those he considered beneath him. "I will not leave my life's work to someone who will destroy it and abuse the people who made it possible," Pierre had said, his hand trembling slightly as he poured them both cognac. "But you, Maya, you understand what this truly means. You understand that we serve not just food, but dignity, respect, and joy." In the months following Pierre's revelation, Maya's life had split into 2 distinct realities that she navigated with increasing skill and secrecy. By day, she remained the unassuming server, taking orders and clearing tables with practiced humility, enduring the casual disrespect and microaggressions that came with being a black woman in a white-dominated luxury space. But after hours, usually after midnight, when the last customer had departed, and the cleaning crew had finished, she and Pierre worked together in his office, reviewing every aspect of the business empire that now included 15 restaurants across 3 states. He introduced her to his lawyer David Chen, his accountant Margaret Sullivan, his most trusted suppliers and business partners, always with the careful explanation that she was his protégée and would be taking on increasing responsibility. Some accepted this easily, charmed by Maya's intelligence and professionalism. Others raised eyebrows but said nothing to Pierre's face, clearly skeptical that a black waitress could possibly be groomed for leadership. Pierre revised his will meticulously with David's help, leaving everything to Maya, including full ownership of all 15 restaurants, the real estate they occupied, and the substantial investment portfolio he had built. But he insisted she keep this secret even after his death, making her promise something that seemed strange at the time. "You must see what Richard will do when he believes himself to be in charge," Pierre had explained one cold February night as snow fell outside the windows. "You must document everything, protect the staff as much as you can, and only reveal yourself when you have built an unassailable case against him. He will show his true nature, and you must be ready to prove it to the world. Promise me this, Maya. Promise me you will be patient and strategic." She had promised, though she could not have imagined how painful it would be to watch Richard dismantle so much of what Pierre had built, to see good people hurt and dismissed, to swallow her anger day after day. When Pierre finally passed away on a gray November morning, Maya had stood at his funeral and wept genuine tears while Richard accepted condolences as the presumed heir, already making plans to take control. The notebook was her constant companion, a small leather-bound journal that Pierre had given her and that she kept locked in her personal locker, filling it with precise observations during her breaks between shifts. Entry after entry documented Richard's systematic corruption in meticulous detail, the exact date he replaced fresh Maine lobster with frozen imports from China while keeping the menu price at $85 per plate. The recorded conversation where he told the wine distributor to deliver cheap bottles in expensive packaging and split the profit difference. The afternoon he cornered Grace in the storage room and threatened her with termination if she reported his inappropriate touching. Maya photographed invoices with her phone, saved emails that Richard carelessly sent from the office computer, recorded conversations with her phone tucked in her apron pocket set to voice memo, and maintained a detailed spreadsheet on her laptop at home that tracked every dollar Richard stole from the restaurant's coffers and every abusive incident he perpetrated. She met regularly with David Chen, Pierre's lawyer who now served as her confidential advisor, reviewing evidence and building a comprehensive legal strategy. She also contacted Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit under an anonymous tip line, providing carefully compiled evidence that led him to open an official investigation into Chi T. Blank's finances. Every piece was falling into place like a complex puzzle, a carefully constructed trap that would soon close around Richard's arrogance and sense of impunity. But Maya also felt the heavy weight of what she carried, the knowledge that her silence allowed harm to continue even as she told herself it was necessary to ensure permanent justice, rather than temporary intervention that Richard could escape. She watched him from across the dining room on countless nights, observing his smug expression as he entertained wealthy guests and collected compliments he did not deserve, and thought to herself with cold determination, "Not much longer now, Richard. Soon you will understand exactly what you have truly lost and who you have been tormenting all this time." The family arrived on a Wednesday evening in early spring, a black couple in their mid-50s, accompanied by their daughter, who appeared to be celebrating something special based on the elegant dress she wore and the bright excitement in her eyes. Maya watched from her station near the kitchen as they approached the host's stand, where Susan stood reviewing the reservation book with her usual practiced smile. The father gave his name and mentioned their 7 o'clock reservation, confirmed just that afternoon. Susan's smile flickered for just a moment, a microsecond of hesitation that Maya had learned to recognize over the years, before she glanced toward the dining room and then back at the family. "I'm so sorry," Susan said with exaggerated sympathy, "but it appears we're completely booked this evening. There must have been some confusion with the reservation system. Perhaps you could try one of the other restaurants downtown." The father frowned, pulling out his phone to show the confirmation email with the Chi Tu Blank logo clearly visible. Susan barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I really do apologize, but as you can see, every table is occupied." This was a lie. Maya could see from where she stood that at least 4 tables in the main dining room remained empty, including 2 prime spots near the window. Before the family could protest further, Maya stepped forward smoothly, her voice calm and professional. "Excuse me, Susan, table 7 in my section is available. I would be honored to serve this family this evening." Susan's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously, but before she could respond, Richard emerged from his office, having apparently overheard the exchange. His face flushed red as he strode across the floor, positioning himself between Maya and the family like a barrier. "Maya, return to your station immediately. Susan handles seating arrangements." He turned to the family with a cold smile. "I'm afraid we simply cannot accommodate walk-ins during our peak hours." "Good evening." The father began to object, explaining again about the reservation, but Richard had already turned away dismissively, snapping his fingers at Maya. "I said return to your station." Now, Maya felt every eye in the restaurant watching as humiliation burned through her chest, but she kept her expression neutral and her voice steady as she addressed the family directly, ignoring Richard's command. "Please, I insist. Table 7 has a beautiful view and I promise you will receive excellent service. Right this way." She picked up 3 menus from the host's stand and began walking toward the table, praying the family would follow. They hesitated only a moment before the daughter touched her father's arm and they moved to follow Maya, clearly uncomfortable with the tension but unwilling to simply leave after being so blatantly discriminated against. Richard's voice rose sharply behind them. "Maya Thompson, you are directly violating my instructions. Stop immediately or face immediate termination." Maya paused, turned slowly to face him, and spoke quietly but clearly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Mr. Beaumont, these guests have a confirmed reservation, and there are empty tables available. Refusing service would be a violation of civil rights laws, and I believe someone of your position would not want that kind of legal exposure." The words were carefully chosen, respectful in tone but unmistakably a warning. Richard's face turned an even deeper shade of red, his jaw clenching as he realized she had backed him into a corner in front of witnesses. After a long, tense moment, he smiled tightly. "Of course. How thoughtful of you to remind me of our legal obligations, Maya. Please do seat our guests. We'll discuss your insubordination later." The promise of retribution hung in the air like smoke as Maya led the family to table 7, her hands shaking slightly as she placed the menus before them. But her voice remained warm and welcoming as she introduced herself properly and assured them they would have a wonderful evening despite the unfortunate beginning. Over the next 90 minutes, Maya poured every ounce of her 18 years of experience into making the family's dinner perfect. She recommended the chef's special preparation of duck confit that wasn't on the standard menu, suggested a wine pairing that perfectly complemented their choices, and ensured that Carlos in the kitchen understood these plates needed to be absolutely flawless. Between courses, she checked on them with genuine warmth, learning that their daughter Jasmine had just been accepted to medical school and this dinner was meant to be a celebration of her achievement. Maya shared in their joy, even as she remained hyper-aware of Richard watching from across the room, his expression dark with barely contained rage. When the dessert course arrived, a beautiful array of petit fours and a complimentary champagne toast that Maya had quietly arranged with the pastry chef, Jasmine's mother reached out and gently squeezed Maya's hand. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you for seeing us. For treating us like we matter." Maya felt her own throat tighten with emotion, but maintained her professional composure. "You do matter. Congratulations on raising such an accomplished daughter. Medical school is a tremendous achievement." When the family finally departed, they left a generous tip in cash pressed directly into Maya's hand, clearly not trusting it would reach her if left on the table. Maya watched them leave, then turned to find Richard standing directly behind her, his presence looming and threatening. Without a word, he held out his hand expectantly. "The tip," he said coldly. "It's against policy for servers to accept cash tips without declaring them to management for proper distribution." This was a lie, one of many Richard had implemented to skim money from the staff, but Maya had no choice in front of the watching restaurant but to hand over the cash, watching as Richard pocketed it without even counting it, his smile cruel and victorious. The discovery came 3 days later when Maya arrived early for her shift and found Carlos in the walk-in cooler, staring at boxes of frozen seafood with an expression of miserable resignation on his face. The head chef, a talented man who had worked with Pierre for 12 years and genuinely cared about the quality of food leaving his kitchen, looked up as Maya entered and shook his head slowly. "He's doing it again," Carlos said quietly, gesturing at the boxes. "Richard wants me to serve this frozen garbage as fresh Atlantic seafood. The menu says pan-seared day boat scallops for $48, but these are frozen Asian scallops that cost about $4 a pound. He's pocketing the difference." Maya moved closer, photographing the boxes with her phone, noting the supplier labels and dates. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. Carlos rubbed his face tiredly. It started small about 6 months after he took over. First it was just switching to cheaper vegetables, things customers might not notice. But it's gotten worse every month. Now has replacing almost everything expensive with cheap substitutes. The wagyu beef is actually choice grade from a discount supplier. The fresh herbs are dried. The artisanal bread is from a commercial bakery. I've complained, I've argued, but he threatens to fire me and hire someone who will follow orders without questions. Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. I know this is hard, Carlos. I know you take pride in your work. But I need you to trust me just a little longer. Keep records of everything he tells you to do. Save the invoices, document the substitutions. Can you do that? Carlos studied her face for a long moment, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. That evening Maya worked her regular shift, but her mind was calculating numbers, comparing menu prices against the actual cost of the ingredients Richard was using, estimating his theft over the past 2 years. By her conservative calculation, he had embezzled at least $750,000 through this scheme alone, not counting the cash tips he confiscated, the ghost employees on the payroll whose checks he cashed himself, and the kickbacks he received from the new suppliers who provided inferior products. She served a table of 8 who ordered the seafood tower, a spectacular presentation that was supposed to include fresh oysters, lobster, king crab, and those scallops Carlos had shown her. As she placed the elaborate display before them, she felt a wave of shame knowing what they were actually being served for their $300 splurge. One of the guests, a woman who seemed knowledgeable about seafood, took a bite of scallop and frowned slightly, exchanging a glance with her husband that spoke volumes. They said nothing, too polite to complain in the moment, but Maya knew they would not return. This was how Richard was destroying Pira's legacy, one disappointed customer at a time, his greed eroding the reputation that had taken decades to build. After her shift, Maya sat in her car in the parking lot and updated her spreadsheet, adding Carlos' information to the growing evidence file. She then composed a careful email to Detective Morrison with photographs attached, providing another piece of the puzzle that would eventually form a complete picture of fraud. The detective had been building his case slowly, subpoenaing financial records and interviewing suppliers. Maya knew from her confidential communications with David Chen that an arrest warrant was being prepared, waiting only for the right moment to be executed. That moment was approaching rapidly. The situation with Grace escalated on a Thursday afternoon during the prep period before the dinner service began. Maya was in the main dining room folding napkins into the intricate fan shapes that Chi Tiu Blanc required when she heard raised voices coming from the direction of the storage room near the back of the house. She recognized Grace's voice, tight with fear and distress, and Richard's deeper tone edged with aggression. Moving quickly but quietly, Maya approached the hallway and stopped just outside the storage room door, which had been left slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see Grace backed against the shelving unit, her 19-year-old face showing clear fear, while Richard stood far too close to her, one hand on the shelf beside her head, effectively caging her in. You need to understand how things work here, Grace, Richard was saying, his voice low but menacing. You're a pretty girl, and you could have a real future in this industry if you're smart about it. But if you keep complaining about every little thing, if you keep running to Maya with your problems, you'll find yourself unemployed and unemployable. I just asked for my full tip share from last Saturday. The other servers said we were supposed to get 20% of pooled tips, but I only received $40 for the whole night. Richard's hand moved from the shelf to Grace's shoulder, a gesture that made the young woman flinch. Maybe you didn't earn your full share. Maybe your service wasn't up to our standards. Or maybe you need to learn to be more grateful for what you receive. His thumb traced along her collarbone in a gesture that was unmistakably inappropriate. Be a good girl, Grace. Smart girls who know how to keep management happy do very well here. Maya had seen and heard enough. She pushed the door fully open, the sudden noise causing Richard to step back from Grace quickly, though not quickly enough to erase what had clearly been happening. "Grace," Maya said calmly, though her heart was pounding with rage, "I need your help setting tables in the main dining room. Right now, please." Grace practically fled past Richard, her relief palpable as she escaped into the hallway. Richard's expression shifted rapidly from surprise to anger as he turned to face Maya. "Eavesdropping now. That's a terminable offense, you know." Maya met his gaze steadily, her phone still recording in her apron pocket, where she had activated it the moment she heard the raised voices. "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was looking for Grace because we need additional setup before service." "Is there a problem?" Richard stepped closer to her, using his height advantage to loom intimidatingly, a tactic that might have worked if Maya was actually the powerless server he believed her to be. "Yes, there's a problem. You're interfering with management decisions, you're turning staff against me, and you're creating a hostile work environment. I've been patient with you because of your long tenure here, but my patience is exhausted. Consider this your final warning, Maya. One more incident of insubordination and you're finished. Do you understand?" Maya held his gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until Richard began to look slightly uncertain. Finally, she spoke quietly. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Beaumont. Will that be all?" The formal coldness of her tone seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He waved her away dismissively and Maya walked calmly back to the dining room, where Grace waited with visible anxiety. Maya led the younger woman to a quiet corner and spoke softly. "Did he touch you inappropriately?" Grace nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's been happening for weeks. Small things at first, comments about my appearance, standing too close. But it's getting worse and I don't know what to do. I need this job, Maya. I'm paying for community college and helping my mom with rent." Maya pulled Grace into a gentle hug, her mind already planning. "You're going to keep this job, and you're going to be safe. I promise you that. But I need you to write down everything that's happened, every incident with dates, if you can remember them. Can you do that for me?" Grace nodded against her shoulder. "I've been keeping a diary. I started writing things down because I was afraid no one would believe me if I ever reported him." Maya pulled back to look at the young woman with newfound respect. "That was very smart. Hold on to that diary. We're going to need it very soon." The staff meeting Richard called for the following Monday morning had an ominous quality from the moment the announcement appeared on the schedule board. All employees were required to attend, even those not scheduled to work that day, with a vague notation that it concerned important changes to restaurant operations and personnel. Maya arrived to find the entire staff gathered in the private dining room normally reserved for large parties, roughly 30 people including servers, bussers, kitchen staff, and bartenders. The room was divided along visible lines, with Richard's favorites, mostly young white servers including Susan, clustered near the front, while Maya, Grace, Carlos, and the other employees of color instinctively grouped toward the back. Richard stood at the head of the room in an expensive navy suit, looking every inch the corporate executive rather than restaurant manager. He began speaking without preamble, his voice carrying the artificial enthusiasm of someone delivering rehearsed remarks. "Thank you all for coming. I've called this meeting because Chu Tu Blank is entering an exciting new phase. We have an opportunity to elevate this establishment to truly international standards, to compete with the finest restaurants not just in this city but in the world. However, to achieve this level of excellence, we need to make some difficult decisions about our brand image and the face we present to our discerning clientele." Maya felt ice forming in her stomach as she recognized the coded language, the corporate speak that was about to justify something unconscionable. Richard continued, clicking through a presentation on a portable screen showing images of famous restaurants in Paris, London, Tokyo, all featuring predominantly white staff in their promotional materials. "Our target demographic expects a certain aesthetic, a certain level of sophistication that aligns with their cultural expectations. We need team members who embody the refined, polished image that attracts and retains high-value customers. Susan spoke up from the front row, her contribution clearly planned in advance. I think what Mr. Beaumont is saying is that we need to think about the total customer experience, including visual presentation and cultural fit. Some of our current staff, while hardworking, may not project the image we're trying to achieve. Several other white servers nodded in agreement, while the employees of color remained silent, the implication landing like a physical blow. Richard smiled approvingly at Susan. Exactly, thank you, Susan. Now, I want to be very clear that this is not about discrimination. This is purely about business strategy and brand positioning. However, we will be implementing some changes over the next few weeks. First, we're updating our dress code and appearance standards to be more stringent. Second, we're restructuring our scheduling to ensure our most polished team members are working during peak hours. Third, we'll be conducting performance reviews, and those who don't meet our elevated standards may be reassigned to less visible positions or, in some cases, released. Carlos spoke up from the back, his accent thicker than usual with emotion. You're saying you want to get rid of the black and brown employees. Just say it directly instead of hiding behind this corporate language. Richard's expression hardened. I'm saying nothing of the sort, and I resent the implication. This is purely about maintaining standards. If certain employees feel threatened by higher expectations, perhaps that tells us something about their capabilities. The room erupted in competing voices, some defending Richard's position, others angrily calling out the obvious racism. Maya remained silent, watching Richard carefully, noting how comfortable he seemed with the chaos, how confident in his power. Finally, he raised his hands for silence. This discussion is over. The new policies will be posted by the end of the week. Those who can't accept them are welcome to seek employment elsewhere. Dismissed. As the staff filed out, Maya caught Grace's terrified expression, Carlos barely suppressed rage, and the smug satisfaction on Susan's face. Richard had finally overplayed his hand, had stated his intentions clearly enough in front of witnesses. Maya pulled out her phone and sent a brief text to David Chen, it's time. The VIP reservation appeared on the books 3 days later, a party of 12 under the name Morrison Hospitality Group. Booked for Friday evening at 8 o'clock with a private tasting menu, requested at $500 per person. Susan had been excited about the reservation, clearly imagining the substantial service charge such a party would generate. Richard personally supervised the preparation, instructing Carlos on an elaborate menu that bore little resemblance to the actual ingredients being used in the kitchen. The printed menu cards featured descriptions of Hokkaido scallops, grass-fed Colorado lamb, wild-caught halibut, and organic heritage vegetables, while the reality involved the same frozen and inferior substitutes Richard had been using for months. Maya had been assigned to serve the party along with 2 other servers, a decision Richard had made with obvious reluctance, but necessary given the size and importance of the reservation. As the appointed hour approached, Maya felt her pulse quicken with a mixture of anticipation and carefully controlled anxiety. Everything was converging toward this moment, and she needed to execute her role perfectly. The guests began arriving, well-dressed professionals who carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to fine dining. Maya recognized the host immediately, having researched Morrison Hospitality Group thoroughly. James Morrison was CEO of one of the largest restaurant and hotel conglomerates in the region, a man whose opinion could make or break an establishment's reputation. What Richard didn't know was that Morrison was also deeply committed to diversity and ethical business practices, having publicly supported various initiatives to combat discrimination in the hospitality industry. He was exactly the kind of witness Maya needed for what was about to unfold. The dinner service began smoothly enough, with Maya and her fellow servers presenting each course with professional precision, Richard hovering nearby to ensure everything met his exacting standards. The first course of supposedly Kumamoto oysters was accepted politely, though Maya noticed Morrison examining them with the eye of someone who knew his seafood. The second course, a butternut squash soup described as containing white truffle oil, drew compliments despite containing only synthetic truffle flavoring. But as the main courses were served, the carefully constructed facade began to crack. Morrison cut into his lamb, described on the menu as Colorado Heritage breed with herb crust, and paused after the first bite. He chewed thoughtfully, then exchanged glances with several others at his table who were having similar reactions. The lamb was tough and gamey, clearly not the quality that the menu promised or the price suggested. Morrison set down his fork and raised his hand slightly, the universal signal for server attention. Maya approached immediately. "Is everything satisfactory, sir?" she asked, her voice professionally neutral. Morrison smiled politely, but his eyes were sharp with assessment. "Could you ask the chef to join us for a moment? I have some questions about the preparation." Richard materialized before Maya could respond, having been watching the table closely. "Is there a problem, Mr. Morrison?" "I'm Richard Beaumont, the general manager." Morrison gestured at his plate. "The menu indicates Colorado Heritage lamb. This doesn't taste like heritage breed, and the texture suggests it may have been frozen. I'm fairly knowledgeable about lamb, and am curious about your sourcing." Richard's smile remained fixed, but Maya could see the tension in his jaw. "I assure you we use only the finest ingredients. Perhaps it's simply prepared differently than you're accustomed to." Morrison's expression cooled noticeably at the condescending response. "I've dined at 3-star Michelin restaurants across 2 continents. I'm quite familiar with properly prepared lamb. This is not what your menu describes, and at $500 per person, I expected accuracy in your representations." Richard's face flushed, his composure beginning to slip as he realized the evening was deteriorating. "If you're not satisfied, perhaps your palate simply isn't sophisticated enough to appreciate our preparations." The words hung in the air like a grenade, and Maya watched several of Morrison's guests react with visible shock at the insult. Morrison's expression shifted from disappointment to cold anger. "I see, and is this the level of service and honesty your establishment typically provides?" Before Richard could dig himself deeper, Maya made a decision that was both calculated risk and moral necessity. She stepped forward slightly, her voice clear and calm. "Mr. Morrison, I apologize for the confusion. The menu descriptions do not accurately reflect the actual ingredients being used this evening. Would you allow me a moment to explain?" Richard whirled on her, his voice sharp with warning. Maya returned to the kitchen immediately. "I'll handle this." But Maya held her ground, meeting Morrison's interested gaze. "Sir, I believe there are several things about this restaurant's operations that you should know. Would you be willing to stay after this meal concludes? I promise it will be worth your time." Morrison studied her for a long moment, clearly recognizing that something significant was happening beneath the surface tension. "Yes," he said slowly. "I believe I would like to hear what you have to say. My colleagues and I will remain." Richard grabbed Maya's arm hard enough to hurt, his voice dropping to a furious hiss. "You're fired. Get out of this restaurant immediately." Maya gently but firmly removed her arm from Richard's grasp, her voice carrying across the now silent private dining room. "I don't think you have the authority to fire me, Richard. In fact, I don't think you've had that authority for quite some time. You've been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about who actually owns this restaurant." Richard's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, anger, and the first flicker of genuine fear. "What are you talking about? My uncle left me this business. You're just a server who's forgotten her place." Maya reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone, but instead of the expected defensive gesture, she spoke with quiet authority. "Your Uncle Pierre left you nothing. He left everything to me, including this restaurant and the 14 others in the chain. I am the legal owner and CEO of Chi2 Blank and all affiliated properties, a fact that has been documented, notarized, and legally confirmed for the past 2 years." The room erupted in shocked voices, Richard's face going pale and then flushing dark red. "That's insane, that's a lie. You're a waitress, you're nobody." Maya's expression remained calm, almost sympathetic. I was a waitress that Pierre trusted enough to teach everything he knew about this business. I was the person he respected enough to leave his life's work to, because he knew what you would do with it. Richard. He knew you would let your greed and prejudice destroy everything he built. And he was right. Richard lunged toward her, but Morrison was already on his feet, positioning himself between them. I think we all need to take a breath here. Maya, you said you had things to explain. Perhaps now would be a good time. Maya nodded, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Richard has been systematically defrauding this restaurant for 2 years. Has been substituting expensive menu ingredients with cheap alternatives and pocketing the difference. Has been skimming cash tips from employees. Has been creating ghost employees and cashing their paychecks. Has also been sexually harassing female employees and engaging in racial discrimination, including his stated plan announced this week to remove employees of color from visible positions. She looked directly at Richard, whose face had gone from red to ashen. I have documented everything. I have invoices, recordings, video footage, financial records, and witness statements. I have also been working with the Police Financial Crimes Unit, and I believe Detective Morrison is actually waiting outside right now to speak with you, Richard. Shall I ask him to come in? Richard's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his confident swagger completely evaporated. Susan had gone pale, clearly realizing her own complicity was about to be exposed. Several other staff members who had gathered near the doorway were staring in absolute shock. James Morrison spoke quietly. Detective Morrison is my cousin. I should mention that. I agreed to bring my group here tonight specifically because he asked me to observe and be prepared to provide testimony about what I witnessed. The lamb substitution alone constitutes consumer fraud. He turned to Maya with new respect. I'm impressed by your strategic thinking and frankly appalled by what you've been enduring. How can my group assist? Maya took a deep breath, feeling 2 years of careful planning and painful silence finally reaching their culmination. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. What would help most right now is if you and your colleagues would be willing to remain as witnesses while we resolve this situation properly. I've asked my attorney to join us, and Detective Morrison from Financial Crimes should arrive shortly. She pulled out her phone and sent 2 brief messages, then looked around the room at the gathered staff, many of whom were staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. I know this is shocking for many of you. I'm sorry I couldn't reveal the truth sooner, but I needed to document the full extent of Richard's crimes before taking action. Some of you have suffered because of my silence, and for that I apologize. Grace stepped forward from where she had been standing near the kitchen entrance, her young face showing a mixture of relief and vindication. You were protecting us. You were building a case strong enough that he couldn't escape or retaliate. Maya nodded gratefully at the young woman. Richard seemed to finally recover his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. This is absurd. You can't possibly have documentation to support these insane allegations. I've run this restaurant profitably for 2 years. I've increased revenue and streamlined operations. Maya's expression remained calm, but her eyes were hard as she met his gaze. You've increased revenue by fraud and theft, Richard. You've destroyed the reputation Pierre spent 30 years building. Shall I be specific about the numbers? She didn't wait for his answer, instead pulling up a document on her phone and reading from it in a clear, measured voice that carried to every corner of the room. In the past 24 months, you have substituted menu ingredients with cheaper alternatives on approximately 2,000 service occasions, overcharging customers by an estimated $460,000. You have confiscated cash tips totaling approximately $87,000 that should have been distributed to staff. You have created 6 ghost employees on the payroll and cashed their paychecks, totaling approximately $140,000. You have accepted kickbacks from 3 different suppliers totaling approximately $68,000 in exchange for exclusive contracts despite their inferior products. The total financial fraud amounts to approximately $755,000. The room was completely silent as she spoke, the specificity of the numbers lending undeniable weight to her accusations. Richard's face had gone gray, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the back of a chair for support. "You can't prove any of that. You're making up numbers." Maya's expression didn't change. "I can prove all of it. I have copies of invoices showing what you actually purchased versus what the menu claimed. I have recordings of your conversations with suppliers arranging kickbacks. I have video footage from cameras I had installed throughout the restaurant showing you pocketing cash and altering financial records. I have testimony from Carlos about the ingredient substitutions you forced him to make. I have the ghost employee records and copies of the checks you cashed. Would you like me to continue, or shall we wait for Detective Morrison to arrive so I can present everything officially?" The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced new arrivals, and a moment later David Chen entered the private dining room, his tailored suit and leather briefcase marking him unmistakably as legal counsel. He was followed by a man in his late 40s wearing a sport coat over business casual attire, his badge visible on his belt. Detective Paul Morrison, cousin to James Morrison, surveyed the room with the practiced assessment of a career investigator. David spoke first, his voice professionally neutral. "Good evening, everyone. I'm David Chen, legal counsel for Miss Thompson and executor of Pierre Beaumont's estate. I have documentation here that confirms Maya Thompson as the sole legal owner of Chi Tu Blanc and all associated properties, as established by Pierre Beaumont's last will and testament, properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the probate court." He pulled several folders from his briefcase and placed them on the nearest table. "These documents have been legally sealed for 2 years at Miss Thompson's request, allowing her to maintain confidentiality while conducting an internal investigation into suspected financial irregularities. That investigation is now complete." Detective Morrison stepped forward, his attention focused on Richard. "Richard Beaumont, I'm Detective Paul Morrison, Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating Chi Blanc's financial operations for the past 8 months based on evidence provided by Miss Thompson. I have a warrant here for your arrest on multiple charges, including wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion." He pulled out handcuffs as he continued reading Miranda rights in a calm, practiced tone. Richard's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into the chair he had been gripping, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "This can't be happening. She's just a waitress. She's nobody." David Chen's expression hardened at Richard's words. "Miss Thompson holds a bachelor's degree in business administration that she completed through night classes over 8 years while working full-time. She was personally mentored by Pierre Beaumont for 6 years in every aspect of restaurant management and hospitality business operations. Pierre recognized in her the intelligence, integrity, and work ethic that you, despite every advantage of education and family connection, never demonstrated. That's why he left her everything, Richard. Because she earned it through merit, while you felt entitled to it through birth." He opened one of the folders and pulled out a letter, the paper slightly yellowed with age. "This is a letter Pierre wrote to be opened after his death, explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Richard slumped in his chair, no longer protesting, as David began to read in Pierre's distinctive phrasing preserved in elegant handwriting. "To whom it may concern, I leave my business empire to Maya Thompson because she embodies everything I hope to build in a lifetime of service. She understands that hospitality is not about extracting maximum profit from customers, but about creating moments of joy and dignity for all people regardless of their wealth or status. She has worked alongside dishwashers and millionaires with equal respect for both. She has sacrificed her own advancement to ensure others were treated fairly. She has the rare combination of business acumen and genuine compassion that this industry desperately needs. My nephew Richard, despite my efforts to teach him otherwise, sees people only as resources to be exploited for his benefit. He lacks the moral character to steward what I have built. Maya will face challenges because of her race and gender, because society often refuses to see excellence in those it has decided are lesser. But I have faith in her strength and strategic intelligence. She will know when the time is right to reveal herself. The letter's words hung in the air, and Maya felt tears threatening despite her determination to remain composed. Several staff members were openly crying, including Carlos, who had moved to stand beside her in a gesture of solidarity and support. Susan had backed into a corner, her face pale, as she clearly calculated her own exposure and culpability in Richard's schemes. James Morrison broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. That's one of the most powerful statements about leadership I've encountered in 30 years in this industry. Pierre was right about Maya, and clearly right about you as well, Richard. He turned to Detective Morrison. I'm prepared to provide formal testimony about the fraud I witnessed here tonight regarding menu misrepresentation. Detective Morrison nodded as he helped Richard to his feet, handcuffs now securing his wrists. We'll need statements from everyone present, but that can be arranged. Ms. Thompson has already provided us with extensive documentation that forms the basis of our case. Tonight's incident is simply additional evidence. Richard finally seemed to find his voice again, though it came out broken and desperate. Maya, please. I made mistakes, but this will destroy my life. Can't we work something out? I'll pay back everything, I'll resign quietly, just don't press charges. Maya looked at him for a long moment, feeling not triumph, but a deep wariness at the waste of it all. You didn't just steal money, Richard. You traumatized Grace and other young women with your harassment. You created an environment of fear and discrimination. You betrayed the trust of customers who came here expecting honesty. You dishonored Pierre's memory and everything he built. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice and ensuring you can't do this to anyone else. Carlos stepped forward, his voice stronger now as he addressed the room. I need to say something. I knew what Richard was forcing me to do was wrong. I knew the food we were serving wasn't what the menu promised. But I was afraid of losing my job, afraid I couldn't find another position at my age with my accent. I let my fear make me complicit in fraud. He looked directly at Maya. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I'm sorry I put my security above the integrity of this kitchen. Maya's expression softened with understanding. Carlos, you were a victim of Richard's manipulation and economic coercion. He specifically targeted people who felt vulnerable, who couldn't afford to lose their income. That's how abusers maintain power. She addressed the room more broadly. Anyone who participated in Richard's schemes under duress or threat will not face retaliation from me. I want to be very clear about that. But I do need everyone to be honest now about what they witnessed and what they were asked to do. There was a long moment of tense silence before Susan slowly raised her hand, her voice trembling. I helped him, with the tip skimming and the reservation discrimination. He told me it was about maintaining standards and maximizing efficiency, but I knew it was wrong. I knew it was racist. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I went along with it because he promised me a management position. I wanted the promotion so badly that I convinced myself the ends justified the means. I'm so sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry, Grace. Grace looked at Susan for a long moment, her expression complex with hurt and anger, but also something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Susan nodded, unable to meet Grace's eyes. I know, I participated in making you feel worthless. You made me question whether I belonged in this industry at all. I almost quit so many times. Susan nodded, unable to meet Grace's eyes. I know, I participated in making you feel worthless. You made me question whether I belonged in this industry at all. I almost quit so many times. Maya took a slow breath, recognizing this moment as crucial for what came next. Susan, you're going to face consequences for your actions. But I believe people can learn and change if they're willing to do the difficult work. We'll discuss your future here after we've dealt with the immediate crisis, but I want you to understand that any path forward requires genuine accountability and commitment to making amends. She turned to Detective Morrison. I have recordings and documentation of Susan's involvement if needed for your investigation, but I'd also like to note that she came forward voluntarily with her admission just now. The detective nodded. Noted. We'll need her full statement. Cooperation and remorse are factors the DA considers. He guided Richard toward the door, the once arrogant manager now looking diminished and defeated in handcuffs. As they passed Maya, Richard stopped and looked at her with an expression that mixed shock, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. How did you hide this for 2 years? How did no one figure it out? Maya met his gaze steadily. Because you and everyone else made assumptions based on my appearance and position. You saw a black woman serving tables and decided you knew everything about me. You never bothered to wonder why Pierre trusted me, why I stayed here for 18 years despite having opportunities elsewhere, why I seemed so calm no matter what you did. You underestimated me completely, Richard. That was your fatal mistake. Detective Morrison led Richard out of the dining room, and the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway seemed to release the tension that had held everyone frozen. Suddenly the room erupted in overlapping conversations, questions, and expressions of disbelief. Maya raised her hands for quiet, and the room gradually settled. I know everyone has questions, and I promise to answer them. But first, Mr. Morrison and his colleagues have had their dinner interrupted rather dramatically, and I think we owe them at least an explanation and an apology. James Morrison smiled warmly, the stress lines around his eyes softening. Actually, this has been the most interesting dining experience I've had in years, though I admit the food quality was disappointing. Maya, I'd very much like to discuss your plans for the restaurant group going forward. I meant what I said about offering advisory support. Maya nodded gratefully. I would welcome that conversation. In the short term, my priority is stabilizing operations, addressing the harm that's been done to staff, and beginning to rebuild the reputation Richard damaged. We'll be implementing immediate policy changes regarding wages, tip distribution, scheduling, and zero-tolerance policies for discrimination and harassment. She looked around at the gathered staff, seeing hope beginning to replace fear in many faces. For those of you who have been harmed by what happened here, I want you to know that I take responsibility for not acting sooner. I made a calculated decision to build an ironclad case before revealing myself, but that meant some of you suffered longer than necessary. I'm sorry for that and am committed to making it right. Grace spoke up, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. What you did was strategic and necessary. If you'd revealed yourself too early, Richard could have fought back, could have destroyed evidence, could have escaped consequences. You sacrificed your own comfort and even your safety to make sure justice was thorough. Several other staff members nodded in agreement, and Maya felt some of the guilt she had been carrying begin to ease. Carlos stepped forward again. What do you need from us now? How can we help? Maya considered for a moment. Tonight we're closing early. I'm sending everyone home with full pay for scheduled shifts. Tomorrow, I'm calling an all-staff meeting where I'll introduce myself formally, explain the transition, and outline the changes we'll be implementing. In the immediate term, Carlos, I'd like you to work with me on restoring the menu to Pierre's original quality standards. I want us serving real food again, the kind of food that made this place legendary. Can you do that? Carlos' face lit up with the first genuine smile Maya had seen from him in months. Absolutely, I have Pierre's original recipes. I know his suppliers. Give me 1 week and I'll have this kitchen running the way it should. Maya smiled back. You have whatever time and resources you need. I'm also promoting you to executive chef with a salary increase. You've earned it through your skill and your integrity under impossible circumstances. She turned to Grace. And like to offer you a different position. In creating a staff advocacy role, someone who'd be responsible for ensuring employee concerns are heard and addressed. You'd also continue your training and service, but with an eye toward eventual management. Interested, Grace's eyes widened in shock and delight. Really, you want me in management? Maya nodded firmly. You kept detailed records even when you were afraid. You stood up for yourself and others despite being vulnerable. You have exactly the kind of courage and integrity I want in leadership positions. Plus, I'm establishing a scholarship fund and you'll be the first recipient. Full tuition for your community college courses, and if you want to pursue hospitality management further, we'll support that too. Grace burst into tears, and several staff members moved to hug her in a spontaneous show of support and celebration. Maya felt her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her practiced composure, but she maintained control, knowing there was still much to do tonight. David Chen touched her arm gently. You need to sign some documents making your ownership officially public and authorizing the policy changes you've outlined. We should probably step into the office for a few minutes. Maya nodded and turned to address the room one more time. I'll be back shortly. In the meantime, please help yourselves to food and drinks from the bar. Consider it a very overdue thank you for your patience and perseverance. As she followed David toward the office that had once been Pierre's sanctuary, she heard the sound of relieved laughter and excited conversation beginning behind her, the sound of people finally free from fear and able to imagine a different future. In the office, surrounded by Pierre's books and photographs, Maya signed document after document that David had prepared, each one a step toward fully claiming the identity she had hidden for 2 years. As she wrote her signature for perhaps the 20th time, David spoke quietly. Pierre would be incredibly proud of you. The way you handled that was masterful. You gave Richard every opportunity to show his true character, documented thoroughly, and then executed your reveal with perfect timing. Maya set down the pen and looked up at him. I feel like I should be more triumphant. Instead, I just feel tired and sad about all the damage that had to happen before we could stop him. David's expression was understanding. That's because you're a good person with genuine empathy, even for someone who tried to destroy you. Richard is going to prison Maya. His life as he knew it is over. It's natural to feel some compassion for that, even though he earned every consequence coming to him. Maya nodded slowly. What happens now with the legal case? David settled into the chair across from her. Detective Morrison has enough evidence to support multiple felony charges. With your documentation, Carla's testimony, Susan's admission, and James Morrison's statement about the fraud, the DA has a very strong case. Richard will likely be offered a plea deal, but even with that, he's looking at significant prison time. The civil side is simpler since you own the business and can demonstrate his theft. You'll be able to recover assets he still has access to, though much of what he stole has likely been spent. Maya absorbed this information, then asked the question that had been weighing on her. What about Susan and the others who were complicit? I meant what I said about believing people can change, but I also need to ensure accountability. David leaned back thoughtfully. That's your decision as owner and CEO. From a legal standpoint, Susan's cooperation will help her avoid criminal charges if the DA decides to pursue them. From an employment standpoint, you have full discretion. My advice would be to require counseling, diversity training, a probationary period with clear expectations, and close supervision. If she demonstrates genuine change, she could eventually be an asset precisely because she'll understand how discrimination works from having participated in it. But if you're not comfortable giving her that chance, termination is absolutely justified. Maya thought about Susan's tears, the shame in her voice, and the years ahead that would determine whether that remorse translated into real transformation. It'll give her one chance. But she needs to understand it's truly one chance, and she'll have to work under Grace's supervision for at least 6 months. If Grace reports any problems, Susan's gone. David smiled slightly. That's both generous and strategic. Having someone who participated in discrimination report to someone they discriminated against creates a powerful accountability dynamic. He gathered the signed documents into his briefcase. There's one more thing. The media is going to be very interested in this story. Black woman secretly owns restaurant chain, documents white manager's fraud and racism, stages dramatic reveal. It has all the elements that generate attention. How do you want to handle that? Maya had been dreading this aspect, knowing her privacy was about to become a thing of the past. I want to control the narrative as much as possible. I'll do one carefully prepared statement and perhaps one interview with a journalist I trust. But I won't let this become a circus or let my staff be harassed. Can you help manage that? David nodded. I have contacts with several PR professionals who specialize in exactly this kind of situation. Well, craft a statement that emphasizes justice, redemption, and your vision for equitable hospitality going forward. They discussed logistics for another 20 minutes before Maya finally stood, stretching muscles that had been tense for hours. I should get back out there and talk to the staff more. This is just the beginning of a very long process of rebuilding trust and culture. As she reached for the door handle, David's voice stopped her. Maya, you did something remarkable here. You took a situation designed to diminish and defeat you, and you transformed it into a platform for justice and change. Don't lose sight of that in the difficult work ahead. Maya smiled genuinely this time. Thank you, David, for everything. Pierre chose his lawyer as wisely as he chose his successor. She opened the door and stepped back into the dining room where her staff, her people, waited to begin building something new from the rubble of what Richard had nearly destroyed. 3 months had passed since the dramatic evening when Maya's carefully constructed plan had finally reached its culmination, and the transformation of Cheese Tiu Blanc was already visible in ways both subtle and profound. Richard Beaumont had been sentenced to 5 years in prison, though the judge had suspended 3 years conditional on his completing 2,000 hours of community service, participating in a comprehensive racial equity education program, and making full restitution of the $755,000 he had stolen. The courtroom had been packed when the sentence was announced, with several staff members present to witness the conclusion of a chapter that had caused them so much pain. Maya had sat quietly in the back row, feeling not triumph but rather a somber satisfaction that justice, imperfect as it always was, had been served. Richard's statement to the court had been halting and emotional, a far cry from his former arrogance. He admitted to letting greed and prejudice corrupt his judgment, acknowledged the harm he had caused to employees and customers, and expressed what appeared to be genuine remorse. Whether that remorse would translate into lasting change remained to be seen, but Maya had meant what she said about believing in the possibility of transformation. Susan had been spared criminal charges in exchange for her cooperation with prosecutors, but her journey had been different and in some ways more challenging than Richard's clear-cut punishment. Maya had kept her promise to give Susan one chance, but only one, and the conditions had been exacting. Susan was demoted from her hostess position to server, placed on 6 months of probation, reporting directly to Grace, required to attend weekly counseling sessions focusing on implicit bias and the psychology of complicity, and mandated to complete a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program. The most remarkable aspect of Susan's transformation had been watching her relationship with Grace evolve from antagonism through uncomfortable coexistence to something approaching mutual respect. In the first weeks, Susan had been defensive and resentful despite her stated remorse, bristling at taking direction from someone she had previously dismissed and mistreated. Grace, for her part, had been uncertain about the power dynamics of supervising someone who had hurt her, worried about appearing vindictive while also determined not to enable further harm. Maya had provided coaching to both women, facilitating difficult conversations about accountability, forgiveness, and the difference between accepting consequences and being punished. Slowly, painfully, something had shifted. Susan began to genuinely listen when Grace explained how certain behaviors and comments caused harm, stopped making defensive excuses, and started asking questions that demonstrated real curiosity about perspectives she had never considered. She apologized directly and specifically for individual incidents Grace had documented, taking responsibility without qualification or justification. Grace, witnessing this effort, began to see Susan not as a villain, but as a flawed person capable of growth. someone whose capacity for change might actually inspire others. By the third month, Susan had written a public letter that was posted in the staff area, detailing her participation in Richard's discriminatory practices and articulating what she had learned about how privilege and ambition had blinded her to injustice. Several other staff members who had remained silent or complicit during Richard's tenure approached Maya privately afterward, thanking Susan for the courage to model accountability and asking for guidance on their own paths toward making amends. The culture of fear and silence that Richard had cultivated was slowly being replaced by one of honesty and mutual support. Carlos had flourished in his new role as executive chef, his passion for his craft finally freed from the constraints and compromises that had nearly broken his spirit. Within 2 weeks of Maya's revelation, he had worked with her to reconnect with Pierre's original suppliers, many of whom had been puzzled and disappointed when Richard had terminated their long-standing relationships. The conversations had been emotional, with several suppliers expressing relief that the quality standards they had worked so hard to meet were being honored again. Carlos had redesigned the menu to highlight seasonal ingredients and had brought back several signature dishes that Pierre had created, along with new preparations that reflected Carlos' own heritage and creativity. The difference was immediately apparent to returning customers, many of whom commented on the restoration of the quality they remembered and had mourned losing. The restaurant's reputation, damaged by 2 years of Richard's fraud, was beginning to recover as word spread through the food community that Chechitiu Blanc was once again serving cuisine worthy of its legacy. Food critics who had written disappointed reviews during Richard's tenure returned for second looks and published glowing updates noting the dramatic improvement. One influential critic wrote that the restaurant had undergone a renaissance, praising not just the food quality, but also the warmth and professionalism of the service staff, who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Reservations, which had been declining steadily under Richard's management, were now booked solid weeks in advance. Revenue had increased by 38% despite Maya raising wages across the board and implementing profit sharing for all employees. It turned out that treating people with dignity and serving honest food was not just ethically right but also excellent business strategy. Grace had embraced her dual role as staff advocate and management trainee with an enthusiasm and competence that confirmed Maya's instinct about her potential. She had established regular office hours when any employee could come to her confidentially with concerns or suggestions, and she had already identified and helped resolve several issues that might otherwise have festered into serious problems. She mediated a dispute between 2 servers about section assignments, identified a scheduling problem that was creating childcare difficulties for several employees, and advocated successfully for updating the aging uniform policy to be more inclusive of different body types and cultural expressions. Maya had also enrolled Grace in a hospitality management certificate program at the local university, with full tuition covered by the scholarship fund she had established in Pierre's memory. Grace attended classes in the mornings and worked evening shifts, often staying late to observe and learn from Maya about the business side of restaurant operations. Her diary, which had documented Richard's harassment and had become evidence in the criminal case, was now being transformed into something else, a reflection on her journey from frightened victim to empowered leader. Grace had mentioned possibly writing an article or even a book someday about workplace harassment and finding your voice, and Maya had encouraged her to pursue that when she felt ready. The transformation in the young woman's confidence and bearing was remarkable to witness, though Maya knew the trauma of what she had endured would take time to fully process and heal. Maya had connected Grace with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma, another benefit she had added to the employee package, and Grace had shared that the counseling was helping her understand her experiences and their impact. The scholarship fund had expanded beyond Grace to support 3 other employees pursuing education, and Maya had plans to grow it further as the restaurant group's profitability increased. She had also established a mentorship program, pairing experienced staff with those interested in advancing their careers, creating pathways for growth that hadn't existed before. The diversity of the leadership team had shifted dramatically, with Maya promoting several employees of color into management positions across the 15 restaurants in the chain. She had conducted a comprehensive review of operations at each location, discovering that Richard's abusive practices had extended beyond the flagship Chagity Blanc. 2 other managers had been terminated for similar though less egregious behavior, and Maya had implemented chain-wide policies on harassment prevention, discrimination complaints, and transparent wage structures. She had hired an external consulting firm specializing in organizational culture transformation to conduct training sessions at every restaurant, focusing on topics like unconscious bias, inclusive leadership, and bystander intervention. The sessions had been uncomfortable at times, forcing staff to confront their own assumptions and behaviors, but feedback indicated that most employees appreciated the investment in creating a healthier workplace. Maya had also joined the board of directors for a national organization promoting diversity in the hospitality industry, using her platform and her story to advocate for systemic changes beyond her own restaurants. She had given several speeches and interviews, carefully managing her message as David had advised, focusing on the possibilities for transformation rather than simply the narrative of victimization and revenge. The media attention had been intense initially, with her story appearing in national publications and even attracting interest from documentary filmmakers. But Maya had maintained firm boundaries about her privacy while being generous with her insights about leadership and justice. On a cool evening in early autumn, Maya stood once again in the main dining room of Chagity Blanc, watching her staff move through their duties with the easy confidence of people who felt valued and secure. The restaurant was full, every table occupied by guests enjoying food that was honestly prepared and beautifully presented, served by staff who took pride in their work because they were treated with respect. Carlos emerged from the kitchen to personally present a special dish to a table of regulars, his face alight with the joy of a craftsman practicing his art without compromise. Grace was training a new server, patiently explaining the details of proper wine service with an authority that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. Susan, working her section with focused diligence, caught Maya's eye and offered a small smile of acknowledgement, the gesture containing layers of gratitude and hard-won understanding. James Morrison and his cousin Detective Paul Morrison sat at a corner table, having become regular customers and informal advisors, their presence a reminder of how justice sometimes required both courage and strategic patience. David Chen was there too, dining with his family, still serving as Maya's legal counsel, but also having become a friend through the intensity of what they had navigated together. Maya felt Pierre's presence in this room, in the candlelight and the music, and the laughter of satisfied guests, in the dignity with which her staff carried themselves, and the excellence they created together. She thought about the letter he had written, his faith in her capacity to not just survive, but to transform what he had left her into something even more meaningful. The journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, still work to be done on healing wounds and building systems that truly supported everyone. But standing in this moment, watching something broken being rebuilt with intention and care, Maya allowed herself to feel hope, not just for Chagity Blanc, but for what was possible when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable and instead claimed their power to create change. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app, where she had been drafting remarks for a speech she would give next week at a hospitality industry conference, where she had been invited to keynote about ethical leadership and transformative justice. She read over the closing paragraphs she had written that morning and made a small edit, adjusting the language to better capture what she wanted to convey. True power does not come from the title on your business card or the size of your bank account. It does not come from your ability to control or diminish others. True power comes from integrity, from the courage to stand up for what is right even when it costs you something, from the commitment to lift others up rather than climb over them. For 18 years I served food in this restaurant while people looked through me as though I were invisible, making assumptions about my capabilities based on my appearance and position. What they did not know was that I was learning, documenting, preparing, and building the case that would eventually bring justice. I had to be patient when I wanted to act immediately. I had to be strategic when I wanted to simply rage against the injustice. I had to believe that the arc of the moral universe, as Dr. King said, bends toward justice, even when that arc seemed impossibly long. My story is not unique. There are countless people working in kitchens, cleaning offices, caring for children, serving customers, who possess brilliance and leadership capacity that goes unrecognized because we have built systems that refuse to see excellence in certain bodies and faces. My challenge to leaders in this industry and every industry is this: look again. Question your assumptions. Create pathways for growth that are based on merit and character, rather than privilege and connections. And to those who feel invisible, who are enduring injustice while the world overlooks their worth, I want you to know that your patience and strategic action matter. Document everything. Build your case carefully. Seek allies who will support you. And when the moment is right, step forward and claim your power. Justice may be slow, but it is possible, and you are worthy of it. Maya saved the document and slipped her phone back into her pocket, then walked across the dining room to greet a table of new customers, her smile genuine and her heart full with the knowledge that she had honored Pira's legacy and created something that would ripple outward far beyond these walls.